James is my middle brother. He's 13 years older than me. He was one of my 3 older brothers, but we had a very unique relationship.
He spent his teen years in San Francisco in the heyday of the hippie thing. He wasn't really a hippie, but he loved the music. And he used to tell stories about in high school when he was working at the Page Street shop. He would actually look out and he'd go right around and he'd look and see who's playing at the clubs, you know. And he'd go, they want $4 to get in there. I can see him in the park next weekend for free. When I met him and he was young, he was 6 feet tall, he was 135 pounds. String bean, always had a beard and a mustache, and of course always had glasses. We were both glasses wearers.
James was the same when he was young as he was all his life. For what I remember, he had a great sense of humor, a very quick-witted sense of humor. He could spin any conversation into something that was hysterical.
Yeah, he exuded confidence, but he was also, super friendly. He had a really, really good sense of humor, and I think a lot of it was driven by how intelligent he was. Like, he could poke fun at somebody, and I don't know that they would always know he was poking fun at them. And this picture is of him looking at the laptop kind of over my shoulder, and he's giving this look like, I don't know how this works. So it's just things like that, really, really funny.
As a kid growing up, he was just that funny uncle, the funny uncle. That guy that was funny without even trying to be funny. He just was one of those people you just wanted to be around because you were always gonna have a smile on your face.
So Dudley Sr. was, he was a hill climber. He was a real famous hill climber. I mean, he won a lot of trophies. And Dudley Perkins, I mean, everybody that rode Harleys, that's where you went. You went to Dudley Perkins because he was the closest one around.
It was the only Harley shop in town. I think it was the oldest family-owned Harley dealership in the world. And I think if you spend any time in the shop, you would have run into James.
Being a Perkins and being related to Harley Davidson was almost like a nationality to all of them. So they all had this deep connection.
And James worked in the parts department. He did sales, which he really did not like sales at all. He loved the parts department. Service was okay, and he worked in all 3 areas. And that was part of the thing that you did for the family. You went through the business by working in all the different departments and learned them all. And then you ended up somewhere managing one of the departments. And it was only he and his brother Tom that were the only, out of 5 siblings, they were the 2 siblings that actually worked in the dealership.
Our customer base was one of the best parts about the dealership, especially being in downtown San Francisco. You had all walks of life, every nationality, every, ethnicity, every religion, and we were also a tourist destination as well, so you got to meet people from all over, all sorts of countries, and, especially when it came to the local customers, these were people that you'd see could be on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis. So you really just got to know a lot of these folks and who they are and, their families and their personal lives.
Right then, I drove down to Page Street to Dudley Perkins, and I pulled up, and there was a guy standing outside, and he had this deadpan look on his face, and he said, where'd you get that at? And I said, I just bought it. I was like really excited, my first Harley. So how much did you pay for it? And I said, $125. And he started laughing and he said, man, you got took, buddy. So I'm thinking to myself, who the hell is this guy, man? I mean, I'm just like, I'm just riding up. It's probably the first time I was ever at Dudley Perkins. And I run into this guy. Well, guess who it turned out to be? It turned out to be James.
I started hanging out at the Dudley Perkins shop in the late 70s. And James was working there. Got to know him, and he was such a neat guy that I thought it would really be nice to become friends with him, and I was fortunate enough to do that.
He was a breath of fresh air, you know, and because he was young, I didn't even know if he was into bikes yet.
The service shop was in the second floor. You go up a ramp to get to it, and James was the service advisor. And immediately his personality is kind of a guy that loves to talk motorcycles or anything else, and when he wasn't busy answering the phone and doing his job, he'd shoot the breeze with you, and it was always good conversation.
I was always working on something, and I was always looking for parts wherever I could find them. He had a few projects, and it's no different. Even if your dad owns the dealership, you're still looking for a part. You know, it went both ways. I mean, I know that there are parts that ended up on Perkins bikes that I had in my garage and vice versa. I mean, we were buddies. He accompanied me the first time that I took Mary Darling out on a date. We double dated and went to see Apocalypse Now or something, you know, just as edgy because, you know, he just had that kind of a sense of humor. Yeah, we did stuff together. We went on motorcycle rides. He used to like to go to breakfast. Sometimes we'd go to the Bridge Cafe when it was open, the Golden Gate Bridge. We went to Gazzo's Creek. We went to the Mark Hopkins had a cafe downstairs right off the parking lot. We used to go there in the morning. So yeah, motorcycle trips, having breakfast, hanging out, you know, greasy guys riding around on Harleys. Yeah.
I was early in my career. I was working in a hospital. I had on a white nurse's uniform, and I walked in to buy a couple quarts of oil. And James was at the parts counter, and I said, "Hi, I need a couple quarts of oil, you know, 20/50 weight oil." And he said, "Okay, great." Put him down on the counter. I paid for him. But he looked at me and he said, "So flowers or fishies?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Flowers or fishies?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Through your uniform, your panties." And I, of course, turned bright red and laughed my ass off. And I said, "Flowers, actually." Maybe a year or two later, he was in the service department, and then I walked up the ramp of the service department and said, "Hi, guess what? I'm getting divorced." And he says, "Oh, gee, I guess I should say I'm sorry." And I kind of shrugged, and he said, "So, you want to go to a punk rock concert on Saturday?" I went, "Okay." And so we did. And we saw Madness and the Specials and English Beat. And I met a whole bunch of motorcycle people and a whole bunch of the San Francisco tattoo crowd, and we were off.
It was apparent how much they were in love and how much they were a perfect match. They both had the interest in Japanese culture and motorcycling and health, and I can't think of something James wasn't impressed with or interested in. He was very knowledgeable.
So I think they started dating probably when I was 12 or 13. He would have been in his late 20s. And then a couple of years later, when I was 16, they got married. The wedding ceremony was at their apartment in San Francisco near UCSF. And their reception was at a Japanese restaurant in the city as well.
And so I was all in very formal Japanese wear, and there are some pictures on the slideshow that show that. James was in a suit and in the only tie he ever had for the 1980s, which there's several pictures of him with that same tie on. But he actually did buy a new suit, and we got married in our flat on Carl Street in San Francisco, which also was filled with a lot of Japanese art and objects to art, as we both had a passion for the Japanese. So we had a lot of fun. Motorcycles, tattoos, rock and roll, no kids. What can you say? Party on, dude, that's what you could say.
I think there came a time when he had to decide whether he wanted to continue to work for the family business, and I don't think that was an easy decision for him to make.
So my brother Tom, his younger brother, my other older brother, he was working in sales with my dad, and James was running the service department.
Oh, his dad was real, like, straight-laced, and James was more of a free spirit. Just the way he expressed himself, did stuff down there. He was always going to be edgy compared to the rest of the crew. I mean, Dud was a hard charger, and he demanded a lot out of everybody that worked for him, but I think the family members especially had to suffer because when they had something going on, everybody had to kind of turn to and be there, be part of the thing.
He had finally earned 3 weeks vacation, and his father told him that he could no longer take vacation, but 1 week at a time, and it could not be between April and October. And you know, Dudley, his father, knew that this was what James and I did, and it felt like and it was like this. We went, this is our passion, this is what we do, this is what drew us together, is we are riding partners.
I would say city life wore on him. You know, having grown up in the city, you know, living there from the time you're a child into your 20s and early 30s, I think a part of him just got fatigued with the busyness, kind of the rat race of it, and they started investigating places where they could, you know, build a home and create a maybe calmer, little more low-key, I don't want to say country life, but that's kind of where they ended up. And so, you know, they found the property in Laytonville, and then, you know, we're going up on weekends, and then eventually, I think once Jane finished her master's, you know, decided like that's where they wanted to live full time. So they started with an Airstream up there, and eventually they built their log house, and just kind of settled into definitely a slower paced life with a really strong sense of community.
There it was, a job, a place, and we lived in a 1953 Spartan trailer for about a year and a half with a hose for water and a wood stove for heat, and we built our log home.
They ordered a kit, they built it on their own land, and it was the sweetest house. It was a good size home, log cabin-ish style, but yeah, cozy, and they were so proud of that house.
Eventually, he ended up working at a aftermarket shop in Ukiah, a motorcycle shop in Ukiah, that mostly worked on dirt bikes and four-wheelers, but also ended up being a KTM dealership. So he learned a lot about Japanese and other types of motorcycles. I think that what was most important to James in his friendships was that people were unique and interesting people. That was one of the things that he said a lot of the time was, this person's really interesting, this person's really cool, this person's just off the wall. People who, you know, lived in suburbia and did what mom and dad said and, you know, accumulated things, he wasn't really interested in them, that they had an interesting story, an interesting personality. Those were the people that attracted me actually also.
James had a group of riders. I mean, it was a club not based up there. It was a group of old friends from the city, and they would all come up and hang out with James and Jane, and from there they would go up to the Redwood Run and then come back.
Every year I would go up there, and you know, I'd always see James. He'd either be working the Redwood Run or whatever.
Everybody camped at the Redwood Run, and when we went up to their place in Laytonville, we had to camp also because there was like a lot of people. They have property that's undeveloped, and they create a whole scene there.
After about 2 or 3 years, no one ever went to the Redwood Run anymore. We just all stayed on our property, and we just partied, we ate, you know, we drank. So this group of people gradually grew and shrunk and expanded and became the Thundering Dummies were the group. It was very tongue-in-cheek. I think it came together someplace in a bar. T-shirts that we made up, or they made up, that Thundering Dummies. It was a skull with a dunce cap on it that said dunce. Down here, 1/8, and James always said that was one brain for every 8 members. And then across rattle, baby rattle, and an all-day sucker. And then underneath it said local, and local was wherever you were at that moment in time. Meetings were called, and everybody would appear, and we'd say, okay, everybody here? They'd say yes, and we'd say, okay, meeting's over, everybody go home. So everything was just kind of a joke.
But the business cards were kind of cool. I may still have some of them. And it was kind of a joke in a way, but we enjoyed being part of that.
We just had a special camaraderie, which we still do. Dummies are still around. COVID kind of slowed us down, but people still get together. And after this memorial, I'm really hoping to have another dummy event. I can't do it at my house, but I think I can probably talk some people into doing a big party for us again.
I don't know that he would say he was artistic, but he had a really great appreciation for art. I mean, some of the pieces that he had tattooed are just intense.
Anything that you asked him, he knew a lot about, or seemed to know quite a bit about, and it seemed like that detail, just taking it to the nth degree, was something that, was one of his little magic powers.
The conversations with James could just go anywhere and everywhere. And that was, one of the fun parts about it. And, if it did get into history or things like that, it seemed like he was one of those guys too that knew a lot about every little thing.
He was an avid model painter, like the little lead models of soldiers and all sorts of different figures. So you would often see him like at his desk just meticulously painting these models.
And he would do this intricate detail painting of each of these, and then create little dioramas.
You would have assumed that it was something you would have bought in a store. Just the level of detail that he would put in them, it just looked professional.
He was also big into history, so it made sense that he was doing this kind of work. I think it gave him another kind of connection to those historical moments and historical figures.
Oh, it was amazing. It was something that took an incredible amount of patience and discipline. And I assume for James it was a bit of a meditative practice. You can just kind of tune everything else out and focus on these tiny little figurines. They were mostly war figures that he was making.
When I learned he was into all of that miniature stuff, I said, you should paint my Snoopy for me, because you're so accurate with all that shit, and you're into World War II stuff. And so, but that's total James Perkins freehand. Even a plaid fucking scarf around Snoopy's neck and all of that. I mean, that's the quality of work that he did on this is reflective of the way he had all of his other models.
So there was that, but then anytime that I would go to visit them in Laytonville, he was always cooking. He was the chef. He was making dinner, he was making breakfast. He was meticulous with cutting and just the way things were arranged on the plate. I think he took a lot of joy in that, and I know Jane really appreciated it because she was working at the health clinic, and she was tired by the time she got home, and she always had these beautiful exotic meals when she got back.
In the last 20 years, 30 years, actually all the time I knew him, what am I saying, 44 years, I never made dinner. He always made dinner because he was very, very good cook.
He was especially good at making us breakfast if we stayed overnight at his place. And I never saw James get angry or upset, except when you got in his way in the kitchen, at which time he would say, "Get the hell out of here, I'm cooking." He enjoyed cooking a lot.
Me being a meat lover, you know, if he was inviting me over, it would be ribs and prime rib or steaks, but he also did stuff that was just, you know, certain chicken meals or you name it. He had, I called him Chef James because it was that quality. It really was.
James made a really good, like a lemonade gin slushy drink. And I mean, it would get so hot up there during the summers. Like all you wanted to do was sit on the porch in the shade with the gin slushy. And then, you know, he would go in and spend 2 hours making dinner.
And then him and Jane during the year, they would take rides all over the United States. And then at Christmas time, they'd write a big letter of this was the year, you know, in a letter, and tell us where they went and what they did, and you know. And his famous thing was at the end, instead of Merry Xmas, he would put Merry Xlax. That was James, you know.
Everything they did, every person they met, every ride they took. And so that was kind of a culmination at the end of the year, but we also went to parties with them and hung out with them and went out eating with them and smoked dope with them and, you know, just did your regular stuff.
We weren't just married, we were best friends, and we were also the best riding partners ever, truly. We rode thousands and thousands of miles. We had iconic trips. We began just by basically doing West Coast up to BC, and before we knew it, within just a few years, we began going across the country. We've been across the country 4 times. We did a museum tour one time where we went to Milwaukee to see You Know Who's museum. We went to the AMA Museum in Westerfield, Ohio. We went to the Anamosa Museum. We went to Dale Wachsler's place in Maggie Valley, North Carolina, and the iconic one was the Barber Museum in Birmingham, which was just quite amazing. We loved Colorado and Utah and New Mexico, loved going into the mountains, tolerated the desert to get there. We loved British Columbia. We have a whole group of friends in Canada, a big group of friends in Canada. But our most epic ride was, we rode the Alaska Highway actually in 1996, which took us 4 or 5 weeks. If you don't know it, in the 1990s, the entire Alaska Highway, 1,800 miles of it was dirt. We rode it on Harleys. We tended to put at least 100,000 miles on a bike before we would sell it. So lots of miles. His last bike will be here for the memorial, and a friend, Jeff Leister, is going to be driving it. It's a Honda F6B, and he got that because I stopped riding about 5 years ago. It was just kind of too much, and we wanted a 2-up bike again so that we could both ride together.
Yeah, this was his last motorcycle. Incredible bike, a 2016 Honda Goldwing F6B. So it's like a Goldwing, but it's a little bit more stripped down. It's supposedly like 60 pounds lighter than the stock Goldwing. His previous bike was a Honda ST, 1100. So it's more of a sport touring bike that you kind of sit and lean forward on. He loved that bike. I think he rode it to about 133,000 miles. And he was getting ready to get another bike when I think Fuki, the previous owner of that bike, approached James and said, "Are you interested in it?" And James said, "Hell yeah." Early on, before everybody went to cell phones and it was still landlines, he was famous for his answering machine.
One of our favorite things to do as a family was to call their house, hope they didn't answer the phone so that you could hear their answering machine.
People would actually call up when there was a new message, and all we would hear would be laughter, and then a hang up. And then before we knew it, within another 20 minutes, there would be another call, and there would be more laughter.
You'd call his house and he'd say, "Welcome to the psychiatric hotline. If you are obsessive compulsive, please press 1 repeatedly. If you are codependent, please ask someone to press 2. If you have multiple personalities, please press 3, 4, 5, and 6.
He would put together a script for his answering machine and then periodically change it so you weren't going to get the same script.
Murderers, bankers, spankers, atheists, commies, thugs, mugs, pugs, TV weathermen, inquisitors, arsonists, dimwits, half-wits, narcs.
Helium was up, feathers down, paper was stationary, pencils lost a few points.
Infected, disrespected, disturbed, perturbed, disenfranchised, disemboweled, or de-articulated, then brother, this is the place to leave a message.
And toilet paper reached a new bottom. I mean, this was, what you listened to before you could leave a message for him.
I really admire James's character. He had a lot of personal integrity. He was thoughtful and kind toward everyone, and he was just a very sweet man. He had a wicked sense of humor.
James had a bit of a sarcastic nature, so they usually had that underlying tension where you were just wondering if James would say something that everybody was thinking, but maybe you didn't want to say in public. But he could do it with a smile on his face and with the humor and love in his heart that it came out just fine.
You had to really listen to what he was saying because you would get it after a while, you know what I mean? He'd make a comment about something and you'd think, well, I wonder what he meant by that. And then you would look around and say, oh, now I know what he meant. He had this really goofball type thing, and he always made like weird faces, and if somebody was talking and interrupting or something, he'd turn around and he'd give he'd roll his eyes saying, oh man, is this guy irritating, so.
He was always laughing. Yeah, and he had this funny thing about him. I can't describe it, but he just had a way of carrying his body. So even if he was like 100 yards away, walking, you would know it was James.
He would walk into the room and he would make room, the whole room emotion would just come up into a much more joyful place because he'd just be cracking jokes. He had a great sense of humor about himself, and you could hit on him and say, rude and ironic and sardonic and things to him, and he would take it and give it right back.
I would like to thank him for being the piss in my pants, because everybody could see it, but only I could feel the warmth. And that was James, man. James was just a good guy, so.
Whenever I had an issue with anything, he was understanding, funny and humorous at the right time, but serious at the right time too. James was a fantastic brother and an amazing friend.
James, I miss you tons. I hope you're having fun with Dad, Grandpa, and Senior, and everybody else.
James, it was such an honor to know you and fun, and I know you're laughing your butt off upstairs.
James, I wish we had gotten to know each other better, because what I knew of you, I really admired and enjoyed being around, and I just wish there had been more of that.
I'm gonna miss you, James. I already missed your Christmas card this year, so we'll see you down the road, pal.
We miss you, buddy. We do.
Because I was a hospice nurse, we talked about death and dying a lot, and we knew exactly what we wanted and what we didn't want. Those things happen, but we also always bet who was going to die first. That was like, I'm going to die first, and he would say, I'm going to die first. No, I'm going to die first because I don't want to be left alone. He'd say, no, I'm going to die first because I'm not getting left alone. Because we were such good friends and such partners in everything in our life. We just intensely loved each other. So when James died, before the funeral home came, you know, I dressed him in an outfit, including this particular t-shirt where he went out with, and a pair of jeans, and I put a quarter in his pocket and I said, "You won, motherfucker, you won."